My name is Chuck Olenek and I'm a reenactor. And for 36 years, I used living history both as a hobby and a way to bring the subject to life for my students in the classroom. Well, I'm not in the classroom anymore, but I've got a room full of garb at home from different time periods, which is really cool, and I can't get rid of that. And I still have this passion for bringing the past alive, and I have a desire to play history detective. So I had to find a way to repurpose myself. Well, I decided I was going to take a deep dive into California history, and the reason for that was, besides living in California, I also never got to teach that subject because of the way the curriculum was set up. So to that end, I'm going up and down the state of California chasing stories. And at first I settled on doing things about the missions because they stuck out, they stood out, all right? And then that led to the Presidios and the Asistencias, the spin-off missions, and that led to going to Northern California and checking out Russian California, studying that, and all this time I'm dressing up in the garb and I'm telling the stories of these places. Well, then I stumbled across a reference to famous Bandidos and Outlaws that may or may not have hung around a desecularized mission San Miguel, and a saloon there. And that kind of twisted my brain around. People were like, what's going on? No, the mission's desecularized. So it's not like a church thing anymore. But someone was enterprising enough to set up a saloon in there. And I was coming across names like Jesse James, the Dalton brothers, Tiburcio Vasquez. So I've started chasing Bandidos. Well, there's a couple of guys from Tulare County, which holds the distinction of having produced the most train robbers in the country, more than any other county in the country. And these guys are Chris Evans and John Sontag. I hope you stick around and watch. This is the story of two train robbers out of Tulare County that basically were produced by the Southern Pacific Railroad. Christopher Evans was born in Canada, I think Ottawa, and apparently at the age of 16 he ran away from home, came into the United States, and enlisted in the Union Army during the Civil War, and he did this under a fake name. Apparently people don't know what the name was. They think he may have actually been stationed possibly with Custer briefly, but he's not going to be in the service very long. And he is going to, as soon as he gets discharged, he follows the train tracks west. When he hits San Benito County, he basically turns left, goes south, and he ends up in Visalia around 1869. And he's going to be a real workhorse. He is doing all kinds of jobs. He's cutting down trees, right? The lumber industry. He is, for a time, running a steamboat on Owens Lake, when there was an Owens Lake. He was working in a mine in San Luis Obispo County. He was running farm equipment. And he was overseeing Chinese work crews building the railroads. And this may have already given him some sort of idea about how the railroads worked, because he's working with the Chinese work crews, but he's also seeing how the farmers are having to pay excessive freight rates. And while he's working as a teamster, I think he's around like 27 at the time, he meets 15-year-old Molly Bird, whose parents owned a farm outside of Visalia. And he ends up marrying her. They got a bunch of kids, number of them die very young. One of the ones that does survive, though, Eva. Eva is going to be important later in the story. Chris ends up hearing from Molly and her family about the evils of the railroads too, because apparently an uncle of hers pretty much got beaten out of his property. So he's not got a good attitude about the railways. Now, one day he goes to Tulare and he runs into an acquaintance there, and he starts talking, and another fellow joins the conversation. This guy is John Sontag. Sontag was born in Minnesota. When he and his brother were very young, their father passed away. His last name was Contant. And their mother ended up remarrying, someone named Sontag, who was a veteran of the Union forces in the Civil War. And John adopted the last name of his stepfather. His younger brother, George, decided to keep Dad's name. And what ended up happening is the brothers parted ways. George ended up getting a job, and he was embezzling, so he ends up going to do time in Nebraska. John goes west. He goes to California, and he gets a job working for the Southern Pacific. And he's a brakeman. And what ends up happening is one day his leg gets crushed, and I guess his ribs get broken, and he's in desperate straits. Well, the railroad promises that they're gonna take care of him. They promise that, hey, there'll be a job waiting for you that's light duty, and the railroad didn't keep its word. And the only reason John managed to stay in Fresno is because friends chipped in. Well, now, here's Sontag and an acquaintance talking about the evils of the railroad, and they're basically, these guys are really hashing things out, and Chris Evans looks at John Sontag, goes, wow, this guy's really in trouble. Hey, do you need a place to stay? You can come live at my place and just do some light work around there. Hey, that's great. So that's working out. Sontag actually ends up getting engaged to Eva. The marriage is not going to ever take place, though, because of certain situations. And one of the things that Evans does is he mortgages his property, and he and Sontag start a livery stable in Modesto. That's only going to last a few months. Fire takes the place, kills the horses. Okay, it's back to the farm. Now they're starting to look at train robbery. Okay, after the failure of the livery stable in Modesto, the guys turn to crime. And the first train robbery that's attributed to them, by the way, it's going to be attributed to them later because somebody else is going to get blamed first. On February 22nd, 1889, the train was held up in Pixley. And the way the guys worked it is they showed up with, they're carrying shotguns, they got sidearms, and that was not a terribly unusual sight to see people around the depot because, people are doing target practice on rabbits and coyotes, and, there's stuff to shoot at. And somehow, though, a deputy from Delano, he kind of senses something's not quite right. And he sees the guys surreptitiously board the train, and he goes to check it out. In the meantime, Evans and Sontag climb over, and they get the engineer and they get the fireman, and they're going to bring him back to the express car. Well, the deputy gets too close and he gets shot, and he'll die from his wounds later. And there's a passenger who allowed his curiosity to get the better of him, and he gets killed. And now Evans and Sontag, who by the way are wearing masks that basically hang down to like mid-chest and cover the faces pretty well, they end up telling the guy in the express car, look, you got to open this, and if you don't, we're going to kill these guys. Door's not opening fast enough, so they ended up setting off an explosive, which didn't really do much of anything, except that it convinced the guy in the express car, yeah, here, you take the money. So they got about $3,000 and they got away. Well, the first train robbery in Pixley is out of the way, but we still have a lot more to cover on Chris Evans and John Sontag. I hope you stick with me on my journey.